Okay, so starting this week, I want to dive into the text of Shema. At least for the first paragraph, I am going to draw heavily on Rabbi Lamb because he does such a beautiful job on Shema. Rabbi Lamb wrote this excellent book just in the first paragraph of Shema, because, he's Rabbi Lamb, so he can write a whole book just on the first paragraph of Shema. But his basic approach, I think, is very important. I once heard from Jonathan Sachs, Hashem should grant him a refuah shlema. He has cancer. People have been asking to learn in his schut. That Chazal in general didn't write philosophical treatises, whatever the plural of treatise is. So he said, right, if you want to look for the theology of Chazal, in general, the theology of Chazal is found in the Siddur, right? The things that they thought that people should believe, they put into the Siddur, and these are the things you repeat. Shema, as we talked about, may even be biblical, but it's definitely the case that a lot of the core things that we believe as Jews are at least hinted to, if not expounded on, in this thing we call Kriyat Shema. And therefore, really understanding Shema is not just an opportunity to understand our tefillah, but it's an opportunity to get into some of the most basic philosophical questions about Judaism. So we can go through Shema at whatever pace you want. I know that you can get a siddur, but I know you all know these psukim. So, I'll alternate. Right now my computer is a little bit temperamental. So dafka for Shema, I think I can get away with some weeks without using source sheets, and we will all understand what we're talking about. So let's dive into it. So let's take it from the top. Okay? First pasuk. Let's see, all of you, I hope you know the first pasuk by heart. All together now, right? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. So which word do we want to take up first? Shema. Okay, good. That's how Rabbi Lamb does it. He goes in order also. Shema. Right, so the first thing that we talk about in Shema, now I want to be clear. We can talk about Shema in different ways. One way to talk about it is Shema as it appears in the Chumash. Now in Chumash, Shema v'ahavta is actually the introduction to the longest part of Moshe's speech in Dvarim. Right? Moshe has an introductory speech in Dvarim that goes through the history of the Jewish people. That's more or less the first 4 paragraphs of 4 prakim of Dvarim, and then he has a 21 prakim speech. That is the laws of Dvarim. That starts with Shema in Perek Hey. Okay, that is, it goes from that almost to the end of the book, and then you get some of the end speeches, right? Hazinu, right? Moshe's death at the end of the book, but that main section of Dvarim starts with Shema. So we could think of it in Chumash terms, but let's focus on it as liturgy for the moment. So what questions do you have when we talk about Shema? Right, why is it that this seminal text of Jewish theology and prayer starts with this word? What strikes you as interesting? Let's talk about it, right? What is interesting? Tell me. Yeah. Good. So first, right? Why the chalal? Right? It seems to be right. There's clearly, as I mentioned in the context, there's a declaration where you're turning to certain people. Right? Moshe is turning to the Jewish people and saying, "Listen to me." That's for sure. Now, what are the things we have to think about when we're talking about Shema? Why? Good. So, okay, good. Right. So, I think part of the answer to this problem is going to be we have to be very careful. How do we translate the word Shema? There are 2 possibilities. What are they? Or more than 2 possibilities. What? It can be listen or hearken. It can be listen or hear. Right? What's the difference between hear and listen? Hear is the physical act of sounds, right, hitting your eardrums. Listen is pay attention. And there's even one more level to it, which is what? Comprehend, right? There's physical listening, hearing. Then there's listening, which is just actually getting the message. But then there's, do you hear what I'm saying, right? Do you comprehend what I'm getting at? And then there's even one more level, which is, is obey, right? Which is, don't you hear me? Aren't you listening? Right? Right? Is obey. Right? So, Shema, we got to figure out which does it mean. Does it mean hear? Does it mean listen? Does it mean obey? Does it mean understand, comprehend? That's one set of questions we need to ask. Another set of questions is that there are two very different ways we can say the same thing. One is with this Shema, listen, hear values, but there's another word we could do which accomplishes it, and that is look. Right? Look here. Right? Look at me. Right? See what's going on. Right? It has the same thing. You can mean physical, it means comprehend. Do you see what's going on? Right? Look at me. Look at this. Right? It has the same connotations, but we actively choose the audio version, and it's not like this is the only time, right? Sometimes in Torah we talk about see. So the two, I think, major questions, we got to figure out which layer of Shema are we talking about. Physically hear, listen, comprehend, obey. And why is it we choose audio rather than visual language? Yeah. So Shema is command. Shema is a command form. No, it's listen, right? Right, because tishma would be you will listen in the future, right? And to turn it into the command, into the imperative, you drop the taf and it says Shema. Like lech is walk. Because it's so good. So Ed is already jumping to the next question, which is why is it in the singular? Or in other words, you're jumping to the second word, right? This is the bridge between the first and the second word, which is who is the Israel, such that it's in singular. Is it the nation we're talking about the nation in singular? Is it the individual Jew or Yaakov? Very good. So Ezra's already. So we might get through both words today. We'll see, right? But Ezra's jumping to the next question. So first question is, let's deal with the word Shema. So Rabbi Lam here notes that several people have suggested, and the truth is that Rabbi Lam quotes it from the Nazir, who's a Talmud of Rav Kook, but many modern academics have made this point as well. Suggest that first, idolatry is identified in Tanakh as a religion of sight, and the religion of God is identified with hearing. Where does he prove it from? Meaning, hearing is meant to say it's not about sight. What psukim does he prove this from? So anyone can open this on their phone or pull a chumash, right? We constantly have this idea about smell. No, I want psukim, right? He has a good proof. What? No, that's about smell. I want sight versus hearing. So someone open a chumash, grab a chumash. Is there a chumash there? Otherwise you can pull up on your phone. This is just chumash. Chumash? Is there? Is that a chumash? It is. Oh, you want to give it to me or you want to read it? You can read it. Perek Daled of Dvarim, meaning right before Shema. Right? He points to the psukim right before Shema. Shema is Perek Hey. Right? So he points to Perek Daled, Pasuk Yud Bet. So what happens in Pasuk Yud Bet? Very good. Moshe describes Har Sinai, and what does he say? Translate that pasuk. God and Hashem speaks to you from fire, a voice of words here, and a picture. You did not see, right? How does Moshe introduce Har Sinai? You heard God and you didn't see anything, right? Then what does he continue? right? He told you his covenant. He told you the Aseret HaDibrot. Yeah. Right, and then he warns him, don't make an idol, because you might want to make an idol of some image. But remember, you didn't see an image. There's no image. There's nothing to make a picture of. You didn't see anything. You only heard voices. Yeah. Right, and therefore, don't make an idol, don't make an image, because there's nothing to make an image of. And the psukim go on over and over. So it's pretty well-founded that the parak immediately preceding Shema tells you that Moshe says, don't worship idols, because that entails making an image, and when you were at Har Sinai, you didn't see an image, you heard a voice. Maybe, right? But it's pretty undeniable that according to the Torah's own conception, Judaism is a religion of hearing and not sight. Sight is, and the Nazir adds that it's in this context. What does Moshe say? Don't make an idol, because seeing leads to idolatry and hearing leads to obedience. Meaning, don't worship God by trying to make an image of what you saw, because you didn't see anything. Instead, you heard words. What did you hear? The covenant of God, the Aseret HaDvarim, the commands. Keep the commands. And therefore, one of the central theological claims of Judaism seems to be that idolatry is about sight, about iconography, about physical ritual and things like that. And Judaism is about obedience, because God is not physical. God cannot be captured. The way to relate to God is by listening. Right? And that seems to be the introduction to Shema, why Shema is important and not Re'eh. Right? Why it's hear and not see. So that's the first major theological point that the Nazir makes. And Rabbi Lamb notes that others have made this point as well. He quotes the chief rabbi of Trier, who says, sound stands nearest to the purely spiritual among the phenomena of the world of the senses. Therefore, God has chosen it to be the medium of sensory revelation. Since what is heard is the least dimensional, it is easier to imagine it as something unlimited, extendable into infinity, than what is visible or tactile. Sense and spirit mutually interact in hearing, right? And then he says a second theological point, which is that hearing, because we have trouble putting our finger on hearing more than we do on sight, it allows us to imagine God more as infinite. Because right, the more physical we relate to something, the harder we have identifying its source as non-physical. But hearing, which is already more, from our perspective, less concrete, yeah.
Like hearing, like it focuses on the impact of the book, and you see it closely as well. Like with seeing, you see it as opposed to hearing, you only hear it, right?
Potentially, yes. Right? 100%. Now, Rabbi Lamb makes this interesting suggestion that he notes that in some places Chazal say, right, that a bat kol comes out from Har Sinai every day, for which Rabbi Lamb says, right, this is a Gemara in Brachot, and it appears in Avot, but basically he uses this to point out that this experience is supposed to be constant. He also has this fascinating suggestion that hearing is something that we sensitize ourselves to something that already exists. Right? It already exists, and we tell you, listen. Now, I'm not sure that's not true about sight. So I'm not sure. Meaning, when we say hear, it's as if the sound already exists. You just got to listen to it. Right? That's how Rabbi Lamb wants to read it. I'm not sure if this is... What? Yeah, I'm not 100% convinced by this. Now, there were some, in the Bnei Yissaschar, the Hasidic Rebbe, he suggests that hearing refers to things you learn from faith, and seeing are things that you get from rational analysis. Now, I may not agree with that, but you see that he's trying to read into this also a theological claim, which is that Judaism is about tradition rather than rational analysis. I'm not sure I would agree with that, right? But you see that he's also trying to read a theological claim into this word, Shema. And Rabbi Lamb notes that non-Jewish scholars have picked up on this as well. And he quotes the Catholic theologian Theodore Rosnak, who writes that Jews acquired an incomparable ear because they heard. They heard as no one else has ever heard. They became history's most alert listeners. Their God was preeminently a voice, one who reveals his magisterial presence by speaking into the world from beyond it. Manifested in the image of sound, the divine presence may span all space, be at once in all places, penetrate all barriers. Okay. Now, the next thing that we said is that hear can either mean hear or listen, comprehend. So, which do we think it means in Shema? Hear or listen or comprehend. Which does it mean? What? So, be careful. I know you want to say that, but the answer is? No, not either of those. It's thank you. It's all the above. How do we know? So let's see if you remember. The Gemara last week that we saw, Brachot Daf Yud Gimel, we saw this last week, said that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi said, Shema Yisrael. What do we learn from that? Chayav Adam Hashmiya Laws. No, you need to hear what you're saying. And what did the Chachamim say? Shema B'chol Lashon Shata Shomea. You can say Shema in any language that you know. What's the machloket? Very good. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says Shema means hear, and therefore you have to hear what you say. The Chachamim who say it in any language you understand think it means comprehend.
Would you say all of the above, or is it machloket?
So it's possibly all of the above, right? Now we paskin which one? It's understand. Lechatchila we say you should hear, but we paskin b'diavad, you have to understand, you don't have to hear. But you see that this is not just, it's not simple, it's a machloket. We paskin, it's understand. Right? So at least one meaning is understand. That's the Chachamim saying it, whatever language you understand is legitimate for Shema. What about know, right, or understand, da? So who takes that interpretation that that's what Shema really is about? So comprehend is literally understand the words. But then there's know that this is true, right? I mean, get it in your head, not just understand the definition, but know this. Who takes that? So, right, so it seems to be implicit in that, right? The fact that we think Shema is about accepting the yoke of heaven. The person who puts it in the actual word is Rav Saadia Gaon. Who is Rabbi Ginsburg giving his Hakdama shir to? It's not you, it's the alumni only? Hakdamot. He's going through introductions to famous Svarim. Okay, so I don't know who he's giving to, but I know he's giving to the alumni. So I know a few weeks ago, I listened to it to see what he was doing. He gave on the introduction to Rav Saadia Gaon. And Rav Saadia Gaon says this, right? That part of it is Shema is to know. But the second one, as Ezra said, is accept. Right? So remember, we said there's four possibilities really of hear. Physically hear. Who holds that? Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. That you have to hear what you're saying. Then there's simply, right, listen. Okay, that seems to be implicit here. Understand is the Chachamim, that just understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. But then there's comprehend, like in a deeper sense, understand this, internalize it. And then there's the, right, kabel, which is accept this, obey. And that is, as Ezra says, the notion that we talk about, Shema being about Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. Shema also means not just hear or listen, even understand, it means accept. Right? So all those words are in fact plausible, raised by major shitot in Chazal and Rishonim, and probably most of them are true, la halacha. Right? In what we think that it means. You have to understand what the word means, you have to internalize it, and you have to accept the consequences that come from that. What? What?
They were saying that all the above thing we have to do all of these?
Yeah, right, you have to understand the word. Right, it sounds like at the end of the day we accept all of them. Lechatchila. And Rabbi Lamb notes that this actually relates to several very famous things that you might have heard as a kid, but are actually very old traditions. So one is from the Abu Draham. The Abu Draham says, why is it that in the Shema the ayin and the dalid are big? Very good, aid. So that's actually a very old parish from the Abu Draham, was a Rishon. Why? Because he thinks that Shema is about testifying to our faith. So what does he think it's about? Understand, internalize, right? Attest to this being true. Now, what's the other one? So another reason that's given is that we don't want it to look like which word? Acher. Very good. That we want to make it very clear that it's echad. Both of these point to the fact that what is the purpose of Shema? Attesting, internalizing and attesting to the fact, meaning, right, there's a reflection. Once we internalize it, then what should we do? Testify to the fact that God is one and make sure that no one thinks that it says acher and not echad. Yeah. No, I don't think so. And even that's only a chumrah, right? When we talk about formal edut, but okay. So you know what? I think we can stop there on the Shema. So that's just the word Shema. Next word, Yisrael. Very good. So as we said, there are three possibilities here in Yisrael that cut to the question that Ezra raised, which is, why is Israel in the singular? So what are the three possibilities? Who is the Israel? Very good. The Jewish people, and then you would have to say, why is it singular? Because it's the Jews as a nation. The second is that it's each and every individual Jew. And the third is that it's a person named Israel. Which of them is correct? Very good. A, B, C, or D, all of the above. And the answer is all of the above. Very good. Very good. So, on the one hand, in Pshat, in the context, in Dvarim, which of the Israels is it? The nation, because this is Moshe's introduction to the 21 Perek speech where he outlines the laws that the Jews have to keep. So the first insight is that if Shema is about the affirmation of divine unity, the first chiddush is that the fact that the pshat is this is the Jewish people tells you that the unity of God is not just a private matter of dogma, that Jews believe that there's also an element of community, right? That we accept God not just as individuals, but as a nation. Which midrashic tradition suggests, as Ezra said, that Yisrael also means the person Yaakov? I don't need you to tell me the daf. The daf is Psachim Daf Nun Vav, right? It's a Gemara in Dvarim Rabbah and it's a Gemara in Psachim. But what's the tradition? Again, very good. What? Very good. Is that the midrash imagines that Yaakov gathers his children around him and he says, I want to bless you, and at that moment, God hides the nevuah about Mashiach from Yaakov, and Yaakov says, oy vey, maybe some of my children are idol worshippers. So what does he do? He questions them, and what do they say to him? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. No, listen, Yaakov, we believe in God. And what does he respond? Baruch Shem Givon Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Right, that's the Gemara in Psachim. Well, what? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So then, guys, the Gemara so this is the version that appears in the Gemara. The Midrash in Dvarim Rabbah adds that this is the source of our chiyuv, meaning that the Jews, the Midrash asked, why were the Jews zocha to get the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema? Because of this original moment. So according to the Midrash, it's not just that it both refers to the Jewish people and Yaakov, but exactly, that because of the original time when it would refer to the person Yaakov, the Jews as a people were zoche to do it as a nation. So there's actually a connection between it. And then Rabbi Lam notes that there's yet a third midrashic tradition in another passage in Dvarim Rabbah, which says as follows. Rabbi Levi says, I'll give you his translation. And what does Israel, the Jewish people, say nowadays? Hear, O Father Israel, we practice that which you commanded us. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So Rabbi Lam writes, according to this midrash, our words repeated twice daily are addressed not to the general community, Klal Yisrael, but to our very personal, intimate forefather, Yaakov Israel. In calling out to him across the chasm of the generations, we assure him and ourselves that the one God he worshipped is ours as well, that we continue his tradition, which he entrusted to his children, that we have not and will not falter as we strive to implement the kingdom of heaven in our own times and our own places, that 3.5 millennia later, we still carry aloft our grandfather's torch of Yichud Hashem, unification of his name, and that we pledge to continue to do so even in an age of cynicism, confusion, and despair. Now, so what does Rabbi Lam make a point of, which I think is fascinating, is that this third midrash, right, one way of understanding is about the Jewish people. One is about individuals talking to Yaakov. But there's really a hybrid, which is every Jew in the future is personally addressing Yaakov. Right? That's how the third midrash imagines it. That we're actually, as we say Shema, we're talking to Yaakov and saying we still do it. So there's really these three versions. We're individuals, right? There's Yaakov and his family. There's the Jewish people as a nation. But then there's us as either individuals or a nation turning back to Yaakov as the person, right? So there is this three levels, the individual, the nation, right, and Yaakov, but they're also connected in two ways. One midrash which says that we are zocha as a nation to say Shema because we once accepted it as a family with an individual. And the second is that even when we're saying Shema at a certain level, we're supposed to imagine ourselves having this conversation. Because Shema isn't just about stating our theological claims, it's also about connecting to our tradition of having accepted these theological claims. And therefore, as individuals and as a nation, we imagine ourselves going back to, to that, whatever, to that moment. There we go. Yes.
It's also interesting about what we're saying is the kingdom area is the unity of God, and seeing through this model we're unifying the experience across generations. So
Yes, for sure. Okay, let's see. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to this. I'm not going to go in Rabbi Lam's order here. I'll come back to it. Because we're already talking about it, because we're already talking about the Yaakov imagery, right? So I think it's worth now skipping for a second to Baruch Shem, and maybe we'll end with this today. Okay? So, is that okay? Do we agree with this? Since we're talking about Yaakov's tradition. So, Chazal imagined that that there was a response in the Yaakov moment of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam V'ed. Now, obviously, this is not in it's not in the Psukim. Now, when else did we say Baruch Shem according to Chazal? So, one is in the Beit HaMikdash, when the Kohen Gadol would say Hashem's name, everyone would respond. It's a praise of God in response to God's name having been said. it's also a long form of Amen, essentially. It's our affirmation that God is forever. And the third thing that we do in Baruch Shem is that we sanctify God's name, right? So one is that we praise God. Two is that we actually are sanctifying it. Baruch Shem, whatever that means. And we're also acknowledging the Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed, that God is forever, right? Those are the three things we're doing when we say Baruch Shem. Rabbi Lamb notes that all three of those themes reflect some of the themes in Shema, right? Because Shema at some level is obviously praising God. As we'll talk about, we talk about in Shema God's eternity, His echad, His unique oneness forever, which again we'll get into. But they're also, we're also acknowledging God, right, as echad, as our God. But we'll come back to these points. Now, where does Baruch Shem come from? So there are really two different midrashic traditions. One is the one we already talked about from Yaakov, right? Where God says, do you believe God? Are you going to keep the mitzvot? We say yes, and God says, Baruch Shem. There's a second midrashic tradition, and that is that it's the malachim, right? That it's what the malachim say, right? And the reason that we don't say it out loud is because, right, it's what the angels say, but it's not in the Torah. So we say it, but we say it silently. Okay, I won't get into all his kavanot here, but I think it's worth noting, right, that these two understandings of Baruch Shem also connect to what we were talking about, the different layers of Shema, right? The Baruch Shem that imagines this is the response to Yaakov is on the plane of, right, part of what we're doing in Shema is affirming our commitments as a nation and as a family, and right, because it's a response. When we say that Baruch Shem is also what the Malachim say, right, we're hitting on something else in it, which is that part of what we're doing in Shema is making statements about the nature of reality, right? And when you think about it, that which the Malachim say, you're focusing much more on that role in Shema. I think there's more to be said about Baruch Shem, but these are some of the things that I think fit into how we're already talking about Shema. Yeah. We presume there's a mitzvah to say it. Presume. But again, we talked about what exactly the mitzvah was, etc. What? Well, that's what we talked about that last week, right? In the last 2 weeks. What's the mitzvah? How do we know? Is it mitzvah to say anything in specific, right? And that was what we talked about. Right. Well, that's part of the question of that. Chachamim say you have to say it, but you don't really have to hear it, which is like a quasi saying. Rabbi Yehuda says you actually have to hear it, which is a higher level of saying in a chanami. Correct. And in our case, yes. Okay. Let's stop there for today. We've gotten through mostly Shema and Yisrael, right? Now